Hello, my name is Morgan Rakowski. I am a senior at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. I am currently studying and double majoring in political science and psychology with a minor in forensic studies. And today I'm going to be talking about my psychology senior SEM research project called Making a Murderer. And essentially, I'm going to be analyzing and conceptualizing the effects between terror management theory on criminogenic thinking patterns. And before I begin, I just wanted to both acknowledge and thank my fellow classmates and my professor, Dr. Brian Burke, for all their help reviewing my project, adding amendments and commentary, and getting it into the condition it is today so I can present to you all. So thank you for tuning in, and let's dive in. First, we're going to start with a study overview. This is going to be talking about the concepts everyone will have to know, the hypothesis, the knowledge gap, the literature review, all that kind of good stuff as we move into the methodology overview. So first, what is terror management theory? Terror management theory is an ideology of both a social and evolutionary psychology perspective. It proposes that there's like this internal conflict between self-preservation and the realization that death is inevitable and somewhat unpredicted. So as a result, this creates an immense amount of unconscious fear about our own death that we try to manage in different ways. So these distractions include literal immortality, symbolic immortality, and then we'll talk about their connections to crime. So literal immortality is the physical things that we do on Earth to extend our age on Earth. So for example, this could be exercising more, dieting, taking medicines, stuff like that, that allow us to live a little longer on Earth. On the flip side, there's symbolic immortality, and this isn't necessarily extending our physical age on Earth, but extending our physical or our symbolic presence on Earth even after we pass away. So it's our reputation that lives on after we die. So in terms of crime, literal immortality can be things like stealing, robbing a bank, stuff like that. That's going to be our instant gratification, instant distractions away from death that make us feel good, but don't necessarily have a reputation associated with it that's going to be everlasting after our death. So stealing a car, robbing a bank again, are all going to be things that maybe they're stealing food that they can create a longer life on Earth. But symbolic immortality on the flip side is going to be more that reputation piece again. And that's going to be things like maybe you want to be the most heinous serial killer in the United States. And by doing this, by committing this crime, committing this act, you will go down as the worst person ever. And maybe you want that. Maybe you want everlasting reputation, even if you get the death penalty or something like that. So we're going to keep that in mind as we move forward. Next, we're going to talk about criminogenic thinking patterns. And essentially, these are just cognitive patterns that often are paired with antisocial or self-destructive behaviors. These are going to be thinking patterns that are often characteristics in offenders in our criminal justice system. They play a role in like the onset or the maintenance of criminal behavior patterns. So anything from being overly controlling, being narcissistic, being cognitively immature, deviant, stuff like that are going to be all things that are wrapped up criminogenic thinking patterns. So in terms of the literature review that exists, there are several different seminal sources that I used that played a really foundational role in this study. So one of them, again, was the terror management theory, and then that second one was going to be the criminogenic thinking styles. However, there was still a lot of other sources that equally contributed to my study. One of them was the potential for evil. This was going to be a report on the banality of evil. It can be used when understanding the potential of evil in everyone and anyone around us. So when we start to understand crime, we really have to take into account that there's a lot of factors that create criminal, not just biological, political, stuff like that, but also just everyone has this potential, and we have to keep that in mind. The second one that really played a huge role was just a hodgepodge of different sources that talked about roots of crime and impulsive behavior. So this could be from the hundreds of psychologists and law enforcement analysts talking about, again, the social, the biological factors that create a criminal. And then finally, we have the fundamental attribution error. And if you don't know what this is, this essentially was used to conceptualize the effects of our interpretation of crime. So when we see someone doing a crime, we personally attack their character. We say they're bad people, they're evil, they need to be locked up and whatnot. But if we were to commit the same acts, it's more of like a situational attack. It's like, oh, I was running late for work and I cut someone off or whatnot. Or I committed this crime because my family is starving and I had to steal food. I needed to do it. It's not a bad thing. But if we saw someone else stealing food or whatnot, we would be like, they're a bad person. They need to be locked up. They need to be punished. So all these we need to keep in mind as I was reviewing the literature that exists. But as we were going through this, or as I was going through this, the current research concerns the political, the economic, the biological, sociological factors that exacerbate someone's acceptance to act lawfully were all really prevalent in the research that I found. However, we still don't really have much research about how death reminders and terror management theory impact a person's desire to commit a crime. So, with that being said, my study wanted to question how terror management theory affects our willingness to have more criminogenic thought patterns that could potentially perpetuate criminal or maladaptive behaviors. And as for the research design, in my hypothesis, I was testing, or I wanted to predict that when an experimental group is reminded of their own death, they would be more likely to have a higher criminogenic thinking score. And I will definitely go into depth about what that means, but that's what I was going to be testing in my study. And so now we're going to review the methodology of my study. So first we're going to talk about the materials and what the survey looked like. Essentially, there's, again, two groups. There's the experimental group, the death group, got the death reminder. And then there was the dental group, the people that were reminded of some dental pain. They all got implied consent sheets. They all got demographic information. Both of them got 2 questions. Whether you're in the death, you got 2 death reminder questions. And then if you're in the dental pain, you got 2 dental pain reminders. And you'll see some examples of what those look like. Then you got a symptoms picture distraction. And essentially what the purpose of this was to give those reminders time to settle into our unconscious mind. And there's been a lot of research showing that adding a distraction that gives them like 10 or 15 seconds or so allows those reminders to settle and not have us be reminded, at least consciously, about them. And then finally, we had the MOX, the measure of criminal thinking or criminogenic thinking styles, 30 question self-report after listed. And then we had the procedure of the independent variables. Those are going to be the questions that I asked for each of those groups. So whether you're in a death pain, you had to talk about the emotions of death and what it looked like. And then the same thing, but just with dental pain, your emotions behind them and what dental pain looks like. Then again, you followed up with the Simpsons distraction. They had to look for the differences in this picture and then move on to the measure of criminogenic thinking patterns. So this is how I measured the dependent variable. It was a 30 question self-report. Each question was scored on a Likert scale basis. So 1 point being strongly disagree to 5 points being strongly agree, totaling to 150 points. So 30 times 5, totaling to 150. And then within each of those 30 questions, I separated it through 3 different subscales that the original MOX test also did. So there was 10 questions for a controlling personality type. There is 10 questions for the cognitive immaturity personality, and then 10 questions for egocentrism. And each of these are just laying out what questions were listed for each of those subscales. So you can feel free to pause it and read a couple of the questions I pulled from the survey. And then as for participants, I had 250 people volunteer. They all had the option to leave and opt out if they decided they didn't want to do it. Luckily, no one did, which was awesome. But it was essentially made up of my family members, some friends, some classmates, coworkers, and even some strangers. And you can see by just these graphs on here how the layouts were. It was 50-50 for both dental and death groups. More females took it, but not necessarily overwhelming. And then we had a pretty good age variety, but you can definitely see where the mean is within my college friends were going to be the people who took it the most. And then again, participants continued. You have ethnicity breakdown, mostly white people took it. You had the education level in the top right. That's going to be mostly seniors and juniors taking it. So again, a lot of my college friends that I knew. And then you have the political party frequency. So mostly Democrats are going to be taking this. A lot of Fort Lewis students are Democrats, but I definitely had some independents, some Republicans, and some other people take it. As for the mock score by group results, most of the information that I received was trending towards death. The only exception to that was the cognitive immaturity score, where the mean was trending actually towards the dental pain. But other than that, everything was trending except for the ecocentrism subskill score. This was a significant result of the mean trending towards death. When reminded about it, they were going to be a little more narcissistic. And so within this is just a graph that, again, shows kind of what those numbers in the table were meaning. Definitely, again, more of them were trending towards death, but you have in this corner here, you have the dental, you have the death and the dental ecocentrism scores. There's going to be a significant difference between those two, which honestly made sense for the results, because in a study called Towards Understanding the Fame Game, the Effect of Mortality Salience on the Appeal of Fame, this was a result that came up, or a study that came up that showed that narcissism and ecocentrism can be linked with mortality salience, which I thought was interesting and paired a lot with my results in my study. And then this is just a further breakdown of the significance level in the ecocentrism subscale. You have it by gender, greater difference of males within death and dental. You have ethnicity. When people are reminded of death, both whites and non-whites were higher. And then you can also see with education level and by political party. And then finally, we have the discussion of my study. So first, we can start with the limitations. As in any study, there's going to be limitations. And for mine, it included the participant composition. So although I had a large number of people participating in my study, I think the composition could have had a little more variety. Like I said, I had a lot of college students take this, although I had some older folks. I could have reached out to maybe more people in Colorado of different ages that I may have known, and maybe even across the United States, maybe through social media accounts and stuff like that. Additionally, there's been a lot of fear and anxiety and all those emotions wrapped up in the 2020 election and COVID-19. So given that I gave this survey 2 weeks prior to the 2020 election, midway through this pandemic, I'm sure that already death reminders were high, and this could have impacted the results of my study. Secondly, there were some strengths that I believe that should be noted. One of them, this was an unprecedented study. Like I said, through the literature review, there was very little, if none, other studies that showed this type of experiment type of study. So that was really important to see and really cool to see. Additionally, I think, like I said, the participant involvement was great for college research. 250 participants was amazing to see, and I'm really glad that happened. And then finally, just like the future directions of this study. Again, the timing of the study, I think, could have changed. I could have potentially taken this class a semester earlier and done this when all this stuff wasn't happening. Or I could have waited and done it maybe later on when the election stuff has ended, as well as the pandemic has kind of settled. And then lastly, what I thought was the most important direction that could have taken this in for maybe future ideas was actually testing terror management theory on the action. And what I mean by that is within this study, I talked about how terror management impacts cognitive thinking, our thinking patterns of criminogenic thought behaviors. But I didn't really test the next step, which was, would they actually want to commit this crime? So would terror management actually perpetuate committing the crime and actually going out and stealing something or breaking in or being a serial killer? And obviously, like I said, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I think that could be a huge direction that I could take this project in for future ideas, because that could help in future scientific reasoning, psychological research, and even for the criminal justice system. So these are my references. And just to conclude, I wanted to again say thank you to everyone that has helped me within this project. I really enjoyed studying how terror management theory impacts the criminogenic thinking patterns. Obviously, there's some future directions I can take this, but thank you for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.